In terms of male victims, you know, when I think about male victims, I think about how hard it must be for them to be able to speak out when they're being abused by their female partner, by their wife or their partner, how difficult it must be to find, you know, similarly for a woman. But I think that in terms of the barriers and the challenges, especially the challenges, are going to be challenges nonetheless, but different in some ways, because a man is always supposed to be, you know, quite macho, you know, the stereotypical, you know, male should be a certain way. Yeah, absolutely. So it makes it more difficult for them, I believe, to be able to speak out. But nonetheless, they do need a listening ear, not just a listening ear, but people that understand what they're going through. Because I'm certain that, you know, if, you know, there's going to be a certain amount of hesitance in sharing, and then you're going to be quite choosy who you share with.
Absolutely.
And that response, when somebody discloses domestic abuse, the response can force them to never speak about it again. If it's a negative response that they receive. So, for example, if somebody turns around and says, "Oh, man up," for example, you need to man up, or they say, you know, "Who's wearing the trousers in your house?" or something like that, that could prevent them from trying to get any support further on down the line. And especially if it was, I know that it wouldn't happen, but if it was a professional, it's even worse if somebody spoke to them like that. But, you know, when somebody realizes that they're in a situation and they need help, that first response is so important, that that person feels that that person can actually listen, has good listening skills, and is able to make them feel that what they've disclosed, that they actually believe what's been said. You know, it's never a judgment call. It's never a judgment call. You know, it shouldn't be a judgment call. We shouldn't discriminate. We should just want to, our aim when somebody discloses domestic abuse or anything is to validate their feelings. Because, you know, regardless of how we see it, it's happening to that individual. And so we have to be empathetic in the way that we respond to somebody that is disclosing domestic abuse. And, you know, you've heard me say it before, and creating those spaces in order for people to be able to disclose.
Express themselves.
Yeah, I think, you know, in this day and age, do people really understand what a confidant is? You know, how important it is to have a confidant. You know, when I think about my friendship groups and family, there's different people that I will speak to about different things. I don't kind of just throw everything on one individual, because I know that the response that I get and the response that I want, they need to have experienced certain things and have wisdom, knowledge, and understanding in different areas in order to give me the best advice. Because I think there's a saying, Ulu, help me with the saying, you know, if the blind lead the blind, they will fall to in their own destruction. Yeah. So you need to ensure that the people that you speak to are informed individuals that can help. Because sometimes what I've found, Ulu, is that people will have pity parties. What do I mean by that? Where everybody sits down, you know, maybe on a Friday night or a Sunday evening, or, you know, they're all online or whatever, and they're talking about the problems, but they're not actually helping to solve the problem. In fact, they can actually make it work. Right. And if somebody gives you the wrong advice, especially in your marriage or in your relationship, you know, you've got to be really careful about those voices that you invite into your relationship. because those voices can make things 10 times worse. It may not be abuse, but they turn around and say it's abuse. It might be abuse and they turn around and say it's not abuse. So you've got to be really careful, you know, about the people that you share your concerns with. Hence the reason that we have specialized organizations that have an ear, a trained ear, you know, and are trained to ensure that the way that their response is going to be helpful to that individual, and to always have that person's best interest at heart. That's another thing, Olu. Sometimes when you share things with people, they don't always have your best interest at heart. And that's really, really important. And going back to what you were saying, Olu, how does that map out for men? Men that don't speak, you know, where do they get the opportunity? How do they get the opportunity to actually say and express what they're doing, their behavior, knowing that it's wrong? You know, because once your partner starts crying and breaking down all the time because of your behavior, you know what you're doing. Where do they go, Olu? Where do they go to get to talk about, you know what, my marriage isn't working, my relationship isn't working, I'm doing things that, you know, I don't know how to do it an alternative way. Yeah.
To be honest, I was just thinking as we're saying now, I was just thinking that we have quite a number of male victims who actually implode, you know, instead of exploding. And I think I would imagine that one of the reasons for such things is because some may not want to overreact or find themselves in a place where they could be criminalized by their response to crisis. Because where men cannot actually verbalize or express themselves to their perpetrators, and they find themselves being verbally abused, for instance, in the process of exploding, they could find themselves overdoing it physically now. And so we see some men remaining on that receiving end, isn't it?
You know, Olu, I have to say, there's no excuse for domestic abuse. There's no excuse that even whether you are, it's difficult for you to manage your emotions. We know what's right and what's wrong. How can we justify it at all, regardless of the fact that you're finding it difficult to manage your emotions, to manage your anger? You know, regardless of what you've been through, there's support there. If you keep hurting somebody willfully, something's wrong. Something is not quite right there that needs to be addressed. If I get up every day, and I've said it before, if I get up every day and I kick the dog, I open the door, the dog's going to go. I'm going to see that my dog's in pain, for example, let alone a human being. Do you know what I mean? But you know what? It's how much it gets. So you get so entrenched. You know, people get so entrenched in it that, you know, they can't see out of that. And I think that is so easy for somebody to do, because after a while you do, it's the norm, but you're not happy every single day. Or you have short windows where there's remorse and and the reconciliation, there's small windows where things seem to be okay, but you're always on walking on eggshells. I just want to share this with you quickly. There was a lady that I grew up with, that I've known. I knew her through school and everything, and she met her partner, and they were together for a very, very long time. She ended up having 3 kids with him, but he was very physically abusive towards her. And the reason why she had 3 children is because while she was pregnant, that's the only time he wouldn't be abusive towards her.
Oh dear.
that's the only time he wasn't abusive is when she was pregnant. So she.
So what then happens at the end? What then happens what happens at the tail end of the childbearing when they don't want to have children again? Then what happened then?
Well, they broke up in the end, but at the same time, it brings me back to Hina last week. The effects that it has on the children is far lasting. The impact, if you know the children, then you can see that it's definitely had an impact on them because they witnessed the abuse towards their mum. And I'm talking about, quite horrific physical abuse, quite horrific. But yeah, it's very challenging. And like I said before, we can't judge. We have to be really careful in terms of what we say, not to make the victim feel worse about the situation because they're never to blame. Yeah, so just encouraging really, just to get that help that's needed. And it's such a shame that our male guest isn't on today to tell his story.
We will have him in future, by the grace of
Yeah.
God. Have him in future.
Yeah.
So, as it is, from your own personal experience, when still talking about male victims, so what are usually the most, from your own consultations, listening to victims, wanting to support? I know you don't do too much of a support of male victims. What's usually the most common cause of abuse in a relationship where males are usually victims?
Did you say cause?
What's the most common reasons for the abuse, domestic abuse, in situations where you find males being victims?
Well, in terms of domestic abuse, it's always about power and control. That's always in the middle. Trying to control another individual. We can try to control our kids in some way, but you're trying to control the relationship and that individual to do what you want them to do. So it's about having that power, that dominance over that individual. And when things aren't going the way that you want them to go, or if you're in a bad mood or whatever it might be, whatever, there's multiple reasons why that can be the trigger. There doesn't have to be something, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person has done something wrong. And I really want to get that message out. It's not because you've done something wrong, although that individual may make you feel like you did something wrong. It's got nothing to do with that. It's the psyche of that individual that says, I can do this. I can get, hence the reason, sometimes so many victims of domestic abuse, they say, it's always an option whether they want to call the police or not. And the majority of the time, they don't want to. They just want the abuse to stop. But, the message, the message that we send out, the individual sends out when they break the silence is a wake-up call for the perpetrator of abuse. Because as long as you're in silence, they're still able to control you. They're still able to have that power over you. But when you send out a clear message, I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm going to start telling my family and friends, because they think that you're the most charming person. They think that you are, the best husband ever, because the majority of the time, perpetrators of domestic abuse are very, very charming. Hence the reason people outside. It's an absolute fact. I kid you not.
Why is that?
Because
is it a cover-up?
A mask. It's a mask that they wear. It was the mask that they wore when they were able to befriend that individual, start dating them, and for them to progress in the relationship.
I see.
It's a mask that they wear. So hence the reason sometimes, when the survivor actually expresses what's going on in the relationship, somebody might turn around and say, well, what did you do? You must have done something, because he's so cool, calm, collective, he's so charming, because they can't see that side of that individual. What makes it even more challenging for the survivor. So yeah, it takes a lot of understanding to unpick it and to understand exactly what it encompasses, all of what it encompasses. And you know, like I've said before, we're always hearing a new story, you know, a new testimony, not a story, a new testimony of somebody's journey through an abusive relationship. You know, sometimes you just look on Facebook, for example, and you see pictures of it where somebody's posted a picture and they've got a big bruise on their face or on their arm or something like that. And they say, look what he did to me today. Or I need to get out, I need to escape, somebody help me. There's so much of it, so much of it. And, you know, going back to Hina again, it's how it affects the children. Will the children become abusers? Will they become survivors of domestic abuse? What is their future if they don't get help that they need? They say, don't tell me, don't teach, tell a child what to do, show me. That's how a child that learns, especially within the home. They learn by what they see. Absolutely. Not by what we say.
As you speak now, I'm just looking at the statistical data of NSPCC, which says at least 62% of children in households where domestic violence is happening are also directly harmed.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's gonna have an effect on the young person. And I've shared it before. It's something that you'll never forget. You'll never forget what you witnessed as a child. And that's part of the post-traumatic stress disorder that stays with them. You've got children that can't sleep at night, that have, they call them night terrors, you know, night terrors where they, you know, because of what they've experienced at such a young, tender age, that they're actually in fear. I think I shared the story where this lady, she was being abused by her partner, and she was so scared, and she picked up the baby and she opened the window and she shouted out to someone and she said, you know, take my child so I can climb out of the window. And she was a young person. And she was in her 20s or something like that, but she definitely wasn't 30. And when I was speaking to her, you know, after the abuse, after it's happened, you know, you kind of, for some, they get back to that place where they're not in fear anymore, and they start to maybe minimize it, justify it, or they go to that place where, you know, there's that affection because of the response of the perpetrator, maybe because they've said sorry, oh, it was because, you know, justifying their abuse. And, you know, the abuse was horrific. Another case where the physical abuse was very horrific. And when I was consulting with her, I was very fearful for her safety because of, you know, this individual and everything else that was entrenched within this relationship that made her risk of serious harm increase. And I said to her, you know, she was like, oh, you know, so what can happen sometimes is after the disclosure and after the incident where they're in fear and they're in crisis, after that, sometimes days later, they go back to feel, you know, the fear's gone and they kind of resume back to their normal stance. And in that, they don't want to pursue any more support or anything like that. But you still, you know, have to do the risk assessment with them and identify, tell them what your concerns are and what their options are. And I said to this young lady, I said to her, you've described to me how you felt very vividly about how you felt when you were trying to escape. And, you know, through that, you decided that you needed to go through the window. That was your only escape. I said, can you imagine how your child felt? If you felt that fearful, how do you think that your child felt? who isn't able to articulate and get a release from having that conversation and saying, I felt like this and I felt like that. But it's, you know, for them, again, it's going to be that internal kind of sensation, yeah, that they're going to be feeling, that they become hyper vigilant. You know, any little thing happens, they're still in that moment. You know, is that daddy? Is that daddy? Is that daddy? Is that, you know, mum's partner? Is he coming back? Is he going to kill us? Is he going to, you know?
I'm my mom.
Yeah, exactly. It's yeah, it's domestic abuse. There is no excuse, Ulu. And you know, Tina Turner wrote a song, and she said, "What has love got to do with it? What has love got to do with it?" And you know, hence the reason I've been in this field for some time, Ulu, and I haven't left the sector. And I did, you know, and then I kind of started my own business in this sector because you know, for some it might be, I'm not saying that's the case, but for some it might be a tick box exercise. It might be a means to an end because of finance. But for me, it's because I'm passionate to see a change. I want to see a change, Yulu. I want to be part of that change. I want to be somebody that, you know, they call my name, they call the name of my organization, and they'll be like, yep, that organization, that Veronica Simpson, she has our best interest at heart. Let's go to her. Let's go and get the support that we need. And I'm sure it's the same. I'm not going to separate from the other DV organization, that, you know, that we all feel exactly the same way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just going to allow you to take a break now to rest from continuously talking deliberately. So we just take.
I don't know what that meant, Olu.
I want you to save your breath and save your energy a bit, because I'm still going to ask you a number of things when we return from the break, especially still looking back at the example of the gentleman you cited, who is usually calm and well-behaved when the wife is pregnant. And I also want us to peep into children in homes, you know, where this violence is usually perpetrated. So now, just for those who are listening to us live from your various homes, and your story seems to be like one of these that we are sharing, if you seem to be resonating with some of these illustrations or discussions, and up until now, you have still not cried out for help. I don't know when you want to do it. I think this is the best time for you to shout out for help. And that's the reason why we reel out those numbers towards the tail end of the show, where you can receive support, where you can receive help. And we're still going to roll out those numbers today towards the tail end of the show. And it's amazing that this issue of domestic violence, domestic abuse keeps increasing by the day. Excuse me, it keeps increasing by the day. And it's not supposed to be so. I'm not sure whether we are not doing enough advocacy. I'm not sure whether people are beginning to develop thick skin and making it even a culture, a terrible one for that matter. However, I believe there's going to be an end, and it would gradually fizzle out from our communities. So we should just remain positive and keep on giving to the society what we can give along this line. We're going to go on a brief, on a short break now. Please don't touch the dial. The show is still on. When we return, we'll be discussing some other intricacies and some other issues that surrounds domestic abuse and makes relationship to be toxic. Thank you, Veronica.